you all are doing well. Welcome back for another video on this channel. If you're new here, hi, my name is Lillian. I clearly like to talk about books. If books are also your thing, feel free to subscribe and we can all talk about books together. I will apologize up front for the lighting in this video and the glare that is going on with my glasses, but I am filming when the sun has gone down already. It is the 22nd of December when I'm filming this, and so far this month I have read 27 books, and I definitely see myself completing a few more before the end of the year. So in order to preserve my sanity and yours, I decided once again to split my monthly wrap-up into two parts. So in this video we will be talking about all of the poetry collections as well as all of the graphic novels and comics that I read this month. In the last 8 days of the year I don't see myself reading any more graphic novels or poetry collections, so I think I can pretty concisely wrap those up in this video. But I wanted to start off this video talking about the poetry collections that I read this month. If poetry is not your thing, I will give you the timestamp here in order to fast forward through this video to get to the graphic novels and comics discussion. But if you're going to stick around and hear me talk about some poetry, then you are my favorite. Thank you for staying. So the way that I like to do these videos is generally starting with the book that I enjoyed the least and working up to the book that I enjoyed the most. The first collection in this roundup is Post-Colonial Love Poem by Natalie Diaz. This came out in 2020. Natalie Diaz grew up on the Mojave Indian Reservation and is an enrolled member of the Gila River Indian tribe. I had previously read Diaz's first collection when my brother was an Aztec that came out in 2012 and liked it, though I think a couple years ago I ended up decluttering it and donating it because it didn't feel like a collection that I needed to hold on to or wanted to revisit. This latest collection is a clear display of her evolution as a poet from what I remember from her first collection. Her voice has evolved, her techniques have changed and matured, though she does still touch on some of the previous themes and topics that she did in her first collection. The impact that addiction has had on her family and specifically her brothers, as well as how she herself as an Indigenous woman moves through the world and her experience growing up on a reservation. In this second collection, she is touching on some of those topics, as well as exploring the sacredness of waterways and the relationship of bodies of water with human bodies, the ongoing personal and ecological effects of colonialism, queer love, and her relationship with place and people. There were definitely certain poems in this collection that stood out to me. There were several that knocked me off my feet, but they were also mixed in with a number of poems that I think at the end of the day just went over my head. And I think a lot of that feeling for me just comes from my own personal taste in poetry, where I'm at with poetry, my understanding of it. Diaz is clearly a skilled poet and she is flexing her poetic muscles and trying on new skills and techniques in this collection. I think some of the language and the metaphors that were being used in this collection just ended up going over my head. But there were definitely still a number of poems and lines within poems that struck very deeply and profoundly. So at the end of the day, it ended up being a little bit of a mixed bag for me. And I think I remember a somewhat similar feeling with her first collection. So while I can definitely appreciate this collection, I think it wasn't necessarily my favorite. I gave it 3 stars out of 5. The next collection that I'm going to talk about is Indian Giver by John Smelcer or John Smelcer. I don't know if it's a hard C or a soft C, I'm sorry. I think I'm going to stick with Smelcer for the rest of this review. Smelcer is a Native Alaskan writer and scholar of the Atna tribe and is now the last member of his tribe to be fluent in both reading and writing their native language. I found Smelcer's prose to be both satirical and playful while at the same time definitely lamenting this huge loss that he's feeling, and his way of processing it can be kind of sardonic at times. The prose itself felt very grounded and honest and oftentimes ended up being very raw and bitter. As the last member of his tribe who is fluent in their native language, he is wrestling with this huge grief and sense of loss, a grief that comes as a result of hundreds of years of genocide and colonialism and the various experiences of Indigenous peoples throughout that time. I found this collection to be both powerful and raw. The next 3 collections that I'm going to talk about are Mary Oliver collections, starting off with Dog Songs. This is a collection of her poetry surrounding the dogs that she has had throughout her life. Some of the poems are taken from previous collections that she has published. It's Mary Oliver. I enjoy pretty much every Mary Oliver collection that I've ever read. If you are a dog lover, a dog owner, I think you would really get along with this collection. I always find Mary Oliver's prose to be very grounded and accessible, but at the same time still very profound. I also read A Thousand Mornings and her poetry collection Swan. Both were lovely. I really enjoyed both of them. Next, I'm going to talk about the poetry collection Brute by Emily Skaja, or Skaja. I'm not sure how to pronounce her last name, I'm so sorry. And I had a lot of feelings about this collection, and I think I need to take another sip of wine before we talk about it. This was a reread for me of a collection that I read, I believe, in 2018, 2019. And the first time that I read it, it had a really profound impact on me as a poet, as a writer. It left a really deep impression with me and definitely influenced a lot of my work during this time period, and has often played in the back of my mind in snippets over the last several years, so I wanted to go back and revisit it. Upon rereading it, I ended up feeling a little bit differently toward it than I did after the first time that I read it. And I'm still kind of processing this, but I wanted to try and share my thoughts on this as best I could. With this reread, I found that I didn't connect with the text quite as emotionally and profoundly as I did the first time, and I'm still kind of processing why that is. Don't get me wrong, I still really enjoyed this collection, but it was not as soul-shattering to me as it was the first time. And maybe that's just because I'm in a different place in my life, emotionally, mentally, as well as I am in a different place as a writer. There are still lines and excerpts and poems from this collection that still have a big impact on me. But I think how I would describe it is this collection doesn't have the same weight on me as it did the first time that I read it, and weight in the sense of impact and of gravity. But let's discuss what this collection is actually about. Brute is a collection that deals with the ending or the breaking of a relationship that for many reasons was very abusive. The poems in this collection have a very visceral way of talking about and describing different levels of brutality, of breaking, but also beginnings. There are so many lines in this collection that I remember reading for the first time and even reading for a second time, just thinking they were so sharp. Skaja's language is very nimble and also at the same time doesn't shy away from contradicting itself. This collection is a brutal exploration of female rage, the unapologetic, raw, messy, and wild aspect of it. I'll read you a paragraph from one of the poems. This is from the poem Four Hawks. Why is there nothing wild in you to explain it? Nothing killing? Why am I the chaste thing horrified to overtake myself in the brush, I wonder? And if a deer darts across this road and the dead don't take it, don't the dead wait, don't I know? Don't the dead always covet something running? So complicated feelings on that one. I think the first time that I read it, I ended up giving it a very clear 5 stars. I still really enjoyed it upon reread. I gave it, I think it was a 4.5 stars out of 5, but thank you for hearing me out as I was processing all of that. And my favorite poetry collection of this month was Blue Horses by Mary Oliver. This was the 4th Mary Oliver collection that I read this month. I ended up getting through all 4 of the Mary Oliver collections that I had checked out from my library, and now I think Blue Horses comes in as my second favorite Mary Oliver collection behind Dreamwork. Dreamwork still has me by the throat, but I still really enjoyed this collection from Mary Oliver, and honestly I have enjoyed pretty much all of her work that I have read. But I think for me, when it comes to ranking Mary Oliver collections, when there are a good number of the poems in the collection that cause me to need to pause, to breathe, to process, or they bring me to tears, those are the ones that end up being my favorites from her. And now on to the graphic novels that I read this month, starting with Extraordinary by V.E. Schwab. This was fine. If you read a lot of and enjoy YA and you like an action-packed, superhero-esque kind of story, you might like this. For me personally, as a reader, I'm just in a place where I don't read a lot of YA and I don't enjoy a lot of YA anymore, and this story and the characters just felt very YA. Our main character is a teenager who had a near-death experience, which has for some reason given her these extraordinary capabilities, these kind of otherworldly powers that allow her to see other people's deaths. People like her in this story are called extraordinaries, EOs, and there's one EO in particular that has the power of immortality. He can't be killed, and he has made it his mission to kill all of the other EOs because he thinks that they are a danger to society and a religious blasphemy. And so of course he ends up coming after our main character. Again, this was fine, was not my cup of tea at the end of the day, and I don't think I'll be continuing with the series. Next, let's talk about The Fall by Jared Muralt. I'm having a hard time saying that. This story starts out with a pandemic and growing societal collapse and follows a family as they struggle to survive through it. If you're not in a place where you want to read about pandemic stories, then I would shy away from this one, just a heads up. The story itself is very plot heavy, and I think if you enjoy The Walking Dead, I think you would also enjoy this. Personally, as a reader, I tend to prefer stories that are a little bit more character focused, character development focused, or at least have a nice balance between the plot and the character focus in the story. At the end of this volume, I didn't feel like I really knew any of the characters, like who they are as people, and so it was a little bit hard to care about some of them. A lot of them just felt like kind of standard fill characters to me, and personally it was a little bit difficult to move through a story where the characters are essentially just getting more and more traumatized by the events of the story itself. This narrative hinges a lot more on action and suspense than sort of character development or dialogue, which, if that's your thing, I think you might enjoy this. At the end of the day, for me, I felt like this was fine, but I don't really feel a need to continue on with the series. Next, let's talk about Lumberjanes volumes 3 and 4 by N.D. Stevenson. This series is a lot of fun. It is full of adventure, it's very lighthearted, it's campy, it's a group of friends at a summer camp who go on adventures in the woods where a number of mystical and magical beings also exist. There are some really great themes of friendship and bravery, and also some lovely, very gentle queer representation. Volumes 3 and 4 were starting to delve a little bit deeper into the history and lore of the Lumberjanes as an organization. I think Volume 1 is still probably my favorite, but I'm still enjoying this series, still planning to continue on with it when I need a little lighthearted reprieve from some of my other reading. Speaking of lighthearted reprieve, I read The Sprite and the Gardener by Abrego, I think is how you say their last name. This was delightful. This is super lighthearted and whimsical. The art is gorgeous and very pastel, very ethereal, and it follows the very adorable story of a garden sprite who teams up with a human to help her regrow her mother's back garden because her mother has been really stressed out at work and her daughter wants to do something nice for her mother and remind her mother of things that they used to do together and spend time together. This graphic novel was really lovely, and I would highly recommend it if you are in the mood for just a stress-free, conflict-free story, as well as some really, really gorgeous, heartwarming art. The next graphic novel that I'm going to talk about is A Man's Skin by Hubert. No last name, no first name, just Hubert. This was a really interesting graphic novel set in Renaissance Italy and follows our main character, Bianca, who is betrothed to be married, but due to the societal gender norms of the day, she is not really allowed to know her betrothed before they are married, and that's something that she would really like to do. Bianca ends up visiting her godmother's house before she is set to be married, and her godmother ends up having a solution to this problem. I'm looking at my notes and I'm giggling because I just wrote family flesh suit, winky face. Which, I mean, accurate. Turns out that the female members of this family have passed down for generations a magical flesh suit that allows you to turn into a man, but apparently various female members of this family have all donned the flesh suit and gallivanted around and had their adventures in the world as a man before they, either outgrew it or decided to, put it back in the chest and let somebody else use it. I don't know if I could keep using the word flesh suit, I'll just call it the suit. But Bianca starts using this suit in order to disguise herself as a man and explore the world and get to know her fiance. While she's wearing the suit, she goes by Lorenzo, and so she ends up meeting her fiance and ends up falling in love with him, but her fiance ends up falling in love with Lorenzo. And so chaos and adventure ensues. I found this graphic novel to be really interesting, really fun, exploring homosexuality and historical context, themes of gender, of sexuality, discussions of feminism, of societal gender roles at play in context with a lot of religious fanaticism that was going around during the time that this is set. We have a little sprinkling of the Inquisition in this story, which adds a little spice and adventure to our story. I had a really fun time reading this graphic novel, and if this sounds at all interesting to you, I would highly recommend it. It's a lot of fun. So the last 3 graphic novels or graphic novel series that are on this list are all new favorites of mine, and quite honestly I feel like they are tied for first place, but just know that the next 3 are all kind of equally ranked in my mind, and the order that I'm talking about really doesn't matter. Abbott, Volume 1 by Saladin Ahamed was incredible. The main character of this story is Elena Abbott, and I just have to start this off by saying she is so freaking cool. She's so cool. She is such a badass. I love her. She is a journalist in Detroit in the 1970s, investigating and reporting on a lot of the police brutality and corruption within the city, and she starts investigating a series of crimes that the police have kind of ignored or tried to push under the rug, and come to find out that a lot of these crimes have a connection that is a bit occult and has ties with Elena's past. And I don't want to give away too much about the story because I think it is kind of best if you go in a little bit blind, but just know that I found it to be incredible. Highly recommend it. I felt like there was a really beautiful balance of both plot, character relationship, character development, writing, dialogue, and action scenes. It felt like the pacing for this story was perfect. I loved it. Not only that, but I loved the main character. She's a badass. There's also some lovely bi-representation with our main character. I read this last night and it was a very easy 5 out of 5 stars for me. Next is also a graphic novel that I read yesterday and was also a 5 out of 5 stars for me, and that is Mamo, Volume 1 by Sas Milledge, I think is how you say their name. This came out in April of this year, and oh my goodness, I loved this so much. The art is breathtakingly gorgeous. In this graphic novel, we're following 2 main characters, Orla and Joe. Orla is from a long line of hedge witches who all come from and live around the town of Hairsden. Orla had previously left the town and has now come back in the wake of her grandmother's passing, and come to find out the town itself is experiencing a lot of magical chaos, and it might have something to do with Orla's grandmother. Our other main character is Joe, who really loves the town and wants to help set it to rights, so she teams up with Orla in order to do that. So these 2 team up in order to figure out what's going on and try to set things to rights. I don't want to say too much more about the plot of the story because I don't want to spoil anything, but the narrative attempts to give answers to the conflict of trying to reconcile our responsibilities, either chosen or forced upon us, with our own dreams. Again, I will reiterate, the art is really, really stunning in this graphic novel. Also, the writing is impeccable. The dialogue flows really beautifully. The character development and the development of the relationship between Joe and Orla is really, really well done. I enjoyed the mystery aspect of the story. I thought the pacing was on point, and there's also some lovely queer rep in this story that just made my queer little heart sing. But if any of that sounds interesting or appealing to you, I implore you, please go pick this one up. And the last thing I'm going to talk about is the Invisible Kingdom series. I read volumes 1 to 3 this month, and that is by Willow Willowson. I talked about reading the first volume of this in my latest reading vlog. I will link that up here, I think. Fingers crossed. And I gave some bullet points for the plot of the first volume of this series. But just to recap, this is a sci-fi drama that follows 2 different women. We have a young religious acolyte who is attempting to follow her path, and a jaded fighter pilot turned delivery ship captain, both of them separately uncovering a larger conspiracy of embezzlement between this religious order that our acolyte is part of and the larger corporation that our fighter pilot delivers packages for. The mega corporation that our delivery ship captain works for has a very strong and powerful hold on pretty much everyone in this star system. They in many ways have just as much power as this religious order, and both of them definitely have a lot more significance and sway than a lot of the local governments do. So the paths of these 2 women end up colliding, and they are kind of forced to work through this, work together. After revealing this scheme to the larger world, they are on the run from both sides, both the religious cult and the mega corporation. Vess, who is the religious acolyte, wrestles very deeply and heavily with a lot of her religious conviction with questions of her faith, as well as the choice between following her faith path and her own desires. And Grix, who is our captain, who is struggling to try and find a way to keep herself and all of her crew safe from this, as well as dealing with the after effects of having her image co-opted for a revolution that she really didn't want to be part of. Again, this series was definitely a 5-star read for me. There are still definitely like critiques here and there that I would give it, but I think I would say this is one of the kind of rarer occasions for me that my own enjoyment of a story and my enjoyment of the characters kind of supersedes my kind of technical critique of the storytelling. I think the series itself is finished within 3 volumes. I think it might have been better if they had 1 more volume in order to flesh things out and expand things, but that also could just be me personally wanting more from these characters and more from this story. I will also shout out that there is some lovely queer rep also in this story. Read a lot of lovely queer focused stories this month. Love it. But I will definitely be curious to check out more from this author as well as the other authors that I read and loved this month. Alright, that is it, my friends. Those are the 18 books that I wanted to talk to you about in this first half of a December wrap-up. Let me know if you have read any of these books, if any of them sound interesting to you. Love to hear from you in the comments. Stay tuned for the second half of this wrap-up. That'll be posting hopefully sometime next week. If you like this video, feel free to give it a thumbs up. That apparently helps. And I hope that all of you are staying happy and healthy during this season. But that is all from me, folks. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. And I'll see you in my next video. Bye.